Hello and welcome to the next installment of the iniBuilds ground school. But in fact today we're not going to be looking at the ground school element of the aircraft, we're going to be focusing on the 1.1 update. This is our first major update to the A300 on the line product line and brings with it a lot of changes. So to try and keep things as short as possible, I'm going to try and go through these with quite rapid succession today because normally I can talk about the FMS for quite literally hours. So today let's try and just focus on these key areas that changed, but don't worry, once 1.1 is out and we've got a really nice stable build for you, I will be returning to continuing the ground school aspect of these training videos. So let's start with the main improvement on 1.1. So we're on the ground yet again at East Midlands Airport, but we're in a slightly different location. Maybe you can spot why. Lots of little round things, people look through them. Yep, that's right. We are actually in the passenger variant of the A300, which is becoming available with the 1.1 update. You might say to yourself, well, that's the biggest thing that you've done this update. No. Now, let me grab some headline changes to this update. So when version 1 came out, a few of you expressed concerns and said, you know what, I love the aircraft, but the performance isn't where I want it to be for my system. So we've listened, and this is what we've done to try and rectify it. It has been an enormous amount of work. I cannot describe to you how much work this has been. Like I said before, we've effectively rewritten 20 to 30% of the entire aircraft from the back end using entirely new code to try and keep the systems as clean as possible. There's a very large forum post made by myself and the rest of the development team that explains this in detail that I'll link below. But what does it mean to you for your flying experience? Because that's the most important thing. If you flew the A300 on shorter routes, you're going to see an improvement. I would say between 20 and 30% along those lines. If you flew the A300 on longer routes, 2,000-3,000 mile routes, pushing it to its max range, you are going to see maybe a 100% improvement in usage and probably maybe a 40 or 50% improvement in frames. So this is a huge upgrade across the board, and we're really happy where the aircraft sits now in terms of its performance for the complexity and the visual fidelity that you're getting with the model. Really, that's what took most of the time for 1.1, and that's why I know a lot of you have been saying, just give it to us, I want it. It's like, we want to give it to you, but it's not as simple as just adding a passenger variant, which in itself is very complicated. It was entirely rewrite and checking that all the systems still work properly and rewriting some of them because they didn't. So what are some of the other major features that are coming with 1.1? Well, we've done an entire new rewrite of auto thrust, EFOB calculation, IRS simulation has been improved, a multitude of improvements across all of the systems, too many to mention, and a lot of bug fixes that will be published in the changelog as well, along with the changes needed for the passenger version. So we've got a whole new 3D cabin, a new lighting system, a new enhanced ground handling package that you're going to see shortly, and just so many other areas that we're going to try and go through them in this video as quick as possible, including a new auto-land system. When the A300 came out, a lot of you were using the auto-land system, and some of you were saying, yeah, it's good, it works well for me, and in the conditions that you would require to use an auto-land, the system actually worked very realistically. It didn't flare too much, the landing was reasonably firm. Now, I understand that a lot of people, when they want to do their flights, they don't want to be met with a 100, 300 foot per minute landing, so we have optimized the aircraft a bit more for smoothness rather than touchdown zone, which it's a balancing act of being realistic. We know we don't want to ruin your flight experience, so we've tuned it more for that, and we did that by just starting again with the system. And it's more adapt to crosswind landings now in the auto-land system. So another big set of changes are the fact that the 1.1 ships with the weather radar, active sky integration for both the weather radar and the EFB, ATIS request and computation feature, and the en route ATIS feature. So when version 1 came out, a lot of you said, I really like the pop-out system that you've given to us, but I'd prefer to be able to move around the captain and the first officer's ND, and that meant we had to use an entirely different rendering system for those. So that's what we've done, and we'll be showing you those later on. It also means you can move it around with the weather and the terrain radar shown on it. So without further ado, let's get started, because as you can see, I got a lot to cover, and I'm already running over time. Standard. Okay, you join me back on the inside of the passenger variant of the A300. Let's start rattling through these changes specific to the passenger variant, and then we're going to take a look at the EFB, talk about the general changes to the EFB, and the ones that are specific to the passenger version. Okay, here you can see the overhead, lit up like a Christmas tree as always, as complicated as always, and as scary as always, but don't be. Like I said, lights out concept. Plenty of videos if you go back in the training that explain how all of this works. So what have we changed for the overhead on the passenger version? So first of all, you can see there's another isolation valve that's off, and we can turn it back on. We get the transient fault light before it turns itself on fully. We have an extra position here, forward cargo hold, and an extra cabin temperature selector for that hold. Makes sense. The pure cargo variant doesn't have as much need for cooling the forward and bulk cargo holds as it has the main deck cargo, as they call it. Another thing up here, you can see there's a blank panel. This is realistic because if you remember before, we used to have the oxygen system up here. It's now been moved all the way to here, and it's a little bit different how it looks because there's only the need for oxygen in the flight deck, no longer in the courier area, that sort of area where you first step foot inside the cargo variant. So there were actually a lot more oxygen mass in there. Any of you fans who've seen Castaway would remember that they actually flew on an A300/A310, and you can see all the oxygen mass that are available there. So just a bit of a throwback and a bit of a tidbit there. That's why you don't need as much oxygen bottles for the crew. Moving down, you can see you have the cargo compartment smoke detector, and what's different here? Well, ultimately the main difference is there's not as much need to detect fire in the main deck. Now, what's the main deck and why does it matter? Well, the main deck is like the whole way through the aircraft of a cargo plane, and there's no one there. It's just full of bags, whatever, you know, big giant containers. And if one at the back sets on fire, you're going to want to know about it, because it could be a while till you really understand, you know, that, oh, we're really on fire, and it's way too late. So they have a lot more of those detectors. Whereas in the passenger version, hopefully anyway, you've got crew that notice and call you up and say, hey, we're on fire at the back. So there's no need for as much detection. So this is why this is reasonably simplified. Most other things are exactly the same as the cargo version. I just want to take a moment here to kind of point out that with the on-the-line package for the A300, we've not just done a cargo and a passenger version. These are two really uniquely done aircraft. It's not just a 3D model and off you go. We've really tailored the entire thing to be specific for those variants and accurate to give you, you know, the feeling of you flying something different. I'm flying a cargo plane, I'm flying a passenger plane. You know, there are differences, and that's what you can see on the overhead. So let's move on to the EFB. Okay, you join me on the familiar page for the EFB. Nothing's really changed here. I'm not going to go through the rest of it because going back and look at the training videos if you're not sure how our EFB works for the A300. But the main areas that have changed are ground ops. So if I click on ground ops now, same thing that we had before. We have the load manager, which works in the same way, but we have some extra sliders for passengers, cargo, and whatnot. Not going to go through that again because I said, you know, we're short on time, but it's fairly self-explanatory. You can use the load sheet in exactly the same way as you did for the A300, and you'll be on your way as quick as possible. But where a lot of changes have happened are on the ground services and the exits page. So on the ground services page, one thing we've taken your feedback on board is you said, you know what, I don't like that this is the button and the indicator. I would prefer that this is the button and that's the indicator. I think it's a very good change, and that's what we've done. So now if I want to, for example, ask the air start unit to come on board, well, not on board the aircraft, it's not going to come for the fly with us, but, you know, connect up to the plane. I click it, the green means it's connected. I click it again, amber means it is not connected. It is a better way of doing it because it ties in with the buttons as well, more of a sort of cohesive user interface. So let's get everything connected, and you can see there's a next button. So it's so many things that we had to split it across two pages. So we have air stairs. If you click air stairs, it's bringing you into a sub menu asking which one do you want, just for the door 1 left, this one here, or the door 4 left, the one at the back. Well, I want both. And again, loader, you want forward, the forward cargo hold, or do you want it for the aft? Well, I want it for both. You can probably hear the ECAM dinging there in the background. What happens is once the ground service vehicles approach the aircraft, the doors automatically open and they start loading the cargo without asking you. This is a philosophy that we're taking at INI, and I want to speak to it from a pilot's perspective. Quite a few add-ons require stairs and fuel trucks and things like that to be connected for things to take place, which to some extent is improves immersion. But as a pilot in the real aircraft, you're not worried about external power, chocks, loaders, air stair, air start unit, pushback trucks. That is not your concern. They simply arrive, they open the door, they load their stuff, they close the door. When they're gone, then you can go. So that's how it works here. You ask, I want these to come, because clearly you might not want it for your certain flight. They come, they do their thing, they leave. You disconnect, you go. That's it. It's as simple as that. And you don't need to use them. You can load with or without them. Same thing as the freighter. So we're going to get everything connected today. Not that I would need the air start unit, but it's there. Pushback, that brings you to the better pushback integration, same as the freighter variant. We also have the fuel truck, passenger bus, catering. So you can actually see the passenger bus has spawned on top of here. You might not want that, depends if you're using AutoGate or SAM. Catering truck and the fuel truck is the same one from the freighter. So let's take a look on the outside at how these look. Okay, you can see we've really overhauled the textures and everything basically across the board. We've redone the animations for all of these because they're brand new for the passenger variant. As you can see, they wouldn't not transferable. The texturing's been upgraded. We've added PBR to basically all of the different items. Even the bus has got some really nice reflections on it. I'm not going to go too much on about it because I want you to get in the sim and use it and take a look at it, because that's where it looks the best. This video doesn't do it justice. It really adds to the experience. I've noticed myself using this a lot, and when you're sitting here, especially on a remote stand, it's great. It really adds to the immersion. You think, you know what, someone's actually loading me. And when I'm in the flight deck and I lean my head over the window and you can see the stairs there, and I love it. So I'm not going to speak too much more about it, but just let your eyes, this is telling you all you need to know. It looks great, it works great, it's simple. So let's imagine we want to leave now and we want to disconnect everything. Even if they're not finished loading, we can disconnect them. So I don't want the fuel truck, I don't want the passengers, I don't want the catering, I don't want the loaders, I don't want the air stairs anymore, I don't want the air start unit, I want the external power. We added another safety feature here. If the external power is connected, you can't click it off here. You need to disconnect it, then disconnect it there. May or may not have done that myself and been embarrassed a few times, but anyway, that's a different story. So if we go back, I said the other page that's changed is the exits page. So clearly there's a lot more exits on the aircraft, or doors, whichever you want to call them. And what I'm going to do at the moment is I'm going to open all the doors, and you can see that we've now given a visual indicator that says open or closed. Now we actually did this for a few reasons. First of all, it's easier to see, and I think it's clearer. But for another reason, that a few people who said they were slightly colorblind said that the color indications were not helping them know if the door were open or closed. And that's something that we never even thought about, and I'm really glad that that was brought up on the forum. So we've made sure here now that it's obvious that it's open or closed for the doors. For the ground objects, a quick check of just going on the outside and going, oh, they're all gone, is the way that I would recommend making sure they're gone if you can't see those little coloured indicators. But a really good suggestion, and that's what we've implemented. One more thing to add, if you do click close all, it's not instant, it's linked to when the door is actually closed. So you can see there it took a little bit of time before they do indeed close. So just give it a moment. I'll take a look on the outside of the plane. Both work. Well, you join me in the cabin. I've already managed to wander halfway down the aircraft and take a seat before we started talking, so you can see where my priorities lie. But hopefully you can get an impression of what the cabin looks like. And I want to really talk about our philosophy with the cabin. It sounds a bit pretentious, but I'm going to roll with it. What do I mean with philosophy for a 3D cabin for a virtual airliner? What I mean is, what was our reasoning behind doing it the way we've done it here? Now, the number one reason was performance. We want to keep performance in mind because we had that Herculean effort to try and make sure that the aircraft used low amount of usage from the code. So if we ruin that with a complex 3D model in terms of the 3D cabin, then it's just not going to help anyone. And what we focused on in the areas in here was to have good lighting, nice views out the window, and a really authentic looking cabin that fit in with what you saw on the A300 freighter. And I really think we've been able to achieve that. We're going to run through the lighting options later. They're pretty interesting and exciting actually. And let's just take a quick look around. So if you can see here, we can see the seating configuration is 242. Well done, you can count as well as I can. Don't know why I did that, but anyway, let's move on. So you can see it's wide. It is a wide body, so I guess the clue's in the name, but it's a very, very wide aircraft, and you can really tell that from when you look at it in the passenger version. In the freighter version, I just didn't get that sense of scale, but I really get it in the passenger version. A cool thing that's coming is with the repaints from iniBuilds, all of the ground handling sets, so the ones we looked at on the outside, they can have custom liveries put on them, as well as the interior, with some nice little custom touches you might see on the TV screens, the projectors, and on the backrests and things like that, which is a really neat touch adding to the immersion of the aircraft. But let's go to another part of the aircraft that really gives you a scale of the thing. Well, why have I taken you to this random seat, you might ask? Well, it's to point a few things out. Just look at that wing. The chord length, which is the length from the front to the back, using fancy words, but never mind. Don't know why I did that. It's huge. I know this isn't a different wing, but it's much more evident how big the wing is on this aircraft when you see it from a passenger's perspective. Now the next thing to draw your eye is the window frame. So what we have on these window frames is we have an inner piece of glass that's shaded and tinted to the correct way, and then we have an outer piece of glass, both 3D modelled, and it gives you that 3D effect. So can you see that dirt? That dirt isn't on the inner one, it's on the outer piece of glass. But it kind of looks like it is. It looks like I can touch it, or not touch it, because there's a piece of glass in the way. But I think you get what I mean. And it just really is a nice place to sit. And this is where we focused our time, because ultimately you're going to be looking for wing views and looking around the cabin. And that's where we spent the time, and we think it's really come out really nicely. Next, let's talk about the lighting options. So you joined me at the lighting panel. Now, where is the lighting panel? As soon as you come out the flight deck, it's on your left-hand side. I didn't want to ruin it by opening the door and going there, so we walked to the back, and we've come all the way back to the front now. But I want to talk about the options you have here. So we have main, blue, purple. You might think, that sounds weird, but let me explain. So we have the main light, which is this white ambient light. If I turn this off, we have no lighting in the cabin, and it looks a bit darker. I recommend, even in daylight, running dim, because in aircraft you never see the lights all the way off, they're always on dim. Now what we've optimized for is if you use main dim, there is 0 frames per second impact for using lights in the cabin. If you use bright, there's a small impact. If you use blue, again a small impact. Purple, a small impact. So if you want 0 frame impact, use main dim. And I think it's one of the nicest ones. I use it all the time, day, night, so, whatever. Let's. I'm going to sit here for about 6 hours and wait for it to get dark. So let me just wait for that. I'll come back to you in 6 hours. Well, that took a long time. So here we are, 6 hours later. One thing we've done for your convenience is, even in a dark flight deck, the lighting control panel is slightly illuminated, so you can see it. It looks a little bit odd when you look at it, but otherwise you're reaching around in the dark, and it's a bit of a pain. You know, you'd have to use a torch in reality or something like that. So let's talk about these settings. So like I said, main dim. The cabin is nicely illuminated in a soft light. Again, at night time even, this is not using any frames per second. So let's take a look at that. So you can see here a nice soft light. Same as in the... You can see it's just a bit brighter, basically. And we're now using some of the X-Plane's dynamic lights to cast light in the cabin. So that's why you get a bit of a frame impact. But it actually looks really, really nice as well. A good setting for boarding. Okay, let's check out the blue and the purple lights. Now, in the essence of time, I'm going to go straight to bright for these, because use your imagination. Dim is like bright, but dimmer. There you go. So bright, and we're going to go to the cabin now. You guys got a few screws loose in your head at iniBuilds. Why are you making the cabin blue? Well, there's a good reason for that. Air Transat, A310 operator, they used a lot of this blue lighting in their cabin. and you know, you can really emulate that sort of operations, and it's just a really cool look in the cabin all the way through. And even if you look from the outside in, you can see this blue light as you're flying along in cruise. Pretty cool. Now, again, purple. You think, what are you guys on about? You know, why is it purple? Well, Thai, they used purple lighting in their A300s actually. So again, if you want to simulate these, you know, pick up the livery from iniBuilds, put the lighting on, you've got a pretty authentic experience here right now. So let's take a look at the cabin with this purple light. So if we look in this direction, you can see it's dynamically casting itself around the cabin. These are done with the X-plane dynamic lights, so it's a really nice effect with that sort of white light spilling out and the purple or blue fluorescent lights throughout the rest of the cabin. I'm not going to say any more on this. It's a great feature. Pick up the plane, play with it yourself. Love it. Well, you join me back in the flight deck once again, and you can see it's got a bit darker and the weather's got a bit worse now. We've made our way out to the runway just to do a few more tests for 1.1. Normally, of course, I'd like to test everything on stand, but we had to get her started up for this one and get it out of the way of the area of the ramp, because we're going to check out the weather radar, which is you know, one of the other big features for 1.1. So it's not using the stock X-plane weather radar, which is nice. It gives us a nice custom image with the correct color details for the A300. So let's take a look at it now. So I'm going to turn the weather radar onto system 1. I'm going to leave the gain in auto, I'm going to tilt it up a little bit, and I'm going to set this to map. So that'd be fine. If you leave the weather in test, it will show you a scan weather test image, and if you leave it in map, then you can see it on your PFD. So let's go and take a look at that now. Okay, you can see that I've put the terrain radar on. I've done that for a good reason. That's so you can see how the weather radar does its scanning and how the terrain radar overrides the weather radar. So if you have the terrain radar on, you're not going to be able to see the weather radar on that side. So let's deselect the terrain radar, and you can see it's scanning from right to left in a 160-degree arc, which is correct for the A300. And you can see we've got nice colors and everything that are correct to the aircraft. If I zoom out, you can see there's a bit of a pause. The old image is left there, and then it does another scan, and you can see it's going to scan all the way to the other side to pick up the rest of the image, and there we go, it's filled out. And this is the weather. You can see the weather image is quite low resolution. That's actually 100% correct for the A300. We mimicked it from the real operation of the weather radar, how it shows and displays the image. So it's a good weather radar, but it's not as sophisticated as modern ones. But I just really like that sort of rescan effect when you have it changed. The old one remains there for a second, and then it starts scanning from one side to the other. That's more obvious in flight as you're going along, but it's good. Operates out to a pretty far range, around 160, 200 miles, and it gives you a nice clear weather image. So let me zoom all the way back in again, let it rescan, and then we can see we're kind of near a big cell now. We obviously wouldn't depart off this runway at this time, so we're just going to sit here. So another thing you can do is you can control the brightness of the weather radar, and this is talking directly to the custom plugin. Something to be aware of is if you do turn the weather image down, it can be quite hard to see what's going on there. But like I say, this knob here also controls the brightness of the terrain radar. So just something for you to be aware of. If you've got it really bright here, come back. It might be a little bit too bright for you, and you can bring the setting down a little bit to see the flight plan a bit better, which is what you often do in reality anyway. So that's the weather radar. It's a nice custom solution, and we're pretty pleased with it. Here we are in East Midlands. Weather's got significantly better than just a few minutes ago. Convenient, some might say, but anyway, let's roll with it. And we're going to just set the thrust for takeoff using the auto thrust system. Now, there's an entirely new auto thrust system and an entirely new spool logic on the A300. What do I mean by that? So on the old system, it wasn't incorrect. We've just refined the system, made it a bit more custom, and it works better throughout the entire ranges of flight. So we have different spool times for different modes. So some for takeoff, some for go around, some for higher altitude, some for lower altitudes. It's all based on the real aircraft's sort of logic, and we've managed to integrate that into the aircraft now. But what's all this talking going to do? Let's take a look at it in action. So I'm going to press the button. We're going to get the takeoff configuration warning because it's going to warn us the brakes are set, but you can see how slowly that thrust lever is progressing, and it's actually why some operators said that you did not need to stabilize the thrust on the A300 before pressing the auto thrust or the toga buttons which are inside of the thrust lever. But here we go, thrust is progressing nicely now, it's getting up quite high and you can see it's still setting. There we have the master warning, so I'll cancel that. Thrust coming up now, 1.4 EPA, we're looking for 1.59, so thrust is set now roughly, and there you go. It kind of reaches its thrust in a more progressive manner. It's a really nice custom system. So, if I disengage the auto thrust and bring the thrust all the way back to idle, you can see that's how quickly I can physically move the thrust levers and the engine spool back a bit too aggressively. The auto thrust is doing a better job than I would, as always. So that's about it. Let's move on. Well, here we are back on the runway. So one last thing we're going to talk about. It's a very simple thing. If you've flown the A300 before, I only need to show you one thing and you'll understand this change completely. There we go. No more needs to be said about that. If you don't know what that is, you'll go, I don't understand. If you've flown the A300, you'll go, oh good. There you go. No more needs to be said. So after my little bit of comedic relief, let's get on to the approach. So what are we trying to show here? Well, what we're trying to show here is the new auto thrust system. You can see it's a fair bit more accurate at keeping speed, and we've made it a bit too accurate. The old one was quite realistic, but in the way that X-Plane injects winds, sometimes it can be quite aggressive with the way that it does it, and it means that the thrust is thrown all over the place, something that a real auto thrust system would not have to deal with. Yes, winds in reality can be very, very severe, but actually in the A300 it's recommended you fly these very severe thrust changes all over the place approaches manually, but we've just refined the system. It's basically more accurate, variable spool time, all that good stuff, and it adds together to a nicer flying experience. You could probably see as it got lock start onto that arrival how it just didn't dip at all, because the real cruise may nudge it, but obviously you can't nudge it in the sim because the auto thrust is the auto thrust. So anyway, we're coming down on the approach now and we're going to demo an auto land. So you can see we're coming through, breaking through the clouds for East Midlands, coming back to land on the runway we took off from before. Here's another nice view from the cabin. You can see that sort of depth view seeing through the wing. It really feels like you're a passenger sitting in the seat ready to come into land. And let's just talk about this new auto land system. The new system, it's better at coping with winds, crosswinds, and generally it's just a bit more refined. Like I said, it also prioritizes a bit more on the smoothness rather than the getting it bang on the touchdown zone. People who've really flown airliners will know that an auto land is far from perfect in nearly every type. Normally, if it gets you on the ground, you go, okay, winner. If it smashes it in, you think, it's what I expected. But I understand that in the sim, we love our feet per minute ratings, and this auto land system is now more sort of kind on that front. You can see it here. So we've got land mode enabled, both autopilots are in. It's going to start the flare shortly. This is real world wind, not calm conditions, a bit of a 6 or 7 knot crosswind. So now it's starting the flare, thrust is coming back, we've got retard on the FMA, and it's just floating a little bit, really nice soft touchdown. Nose comes down just to get, because the auto brakes are kicking in, and now you put reverse thrust. Simple as that. And let's take a look from the outside, same thing, but we can just see a nice progressive flare and a touchdown. The other thing the system does, the old system did this, but it's something to highlight, is in the last phase of the auto land, it doesn't actually chase the glide. It maintains a 3-degree approach path, which is what the real systems do, because the system gets too sensitive at low altitude. You can see it on that approach where the glide goes down out of view. The aircraft doesn't chase it, it maintains its stable approach. And I think that is it. I think I've managed to cover most, but definitely not everything from the 1.1 update. It's a massive update. We are giving you the weather radar, performance increase, which I said is basically the largest item that took us the longest time, the passenger variant, the overhead changes, the cabin, the new auto thrust, the new auto land, check the change log, loads and loads and loads of other bug fixes and improvements across the board, and it's all integrated into this seamless package with all the liveries are going to be available free to download with the purchase of the A300 freighter, you get the freighter liveries, the passenger liveries. The passenger liveries even have all the stuff on the ground handling sets, custom stuff in the interior for not all paints, but a lot of the paints, and that all comes free of charge. So overall, you really are getting the ultimate A300 experience. You're getting all the A300s you could ever want, all packaged up and now available. So thanks again for listening through this. I think I probably overran. My original goal was 25 minutes. Have a look at the timeline. Pretty sure it's more than 25 minutes. Haven't edited this now. Pretty sure I failed probably by a large margin. I'm rambling, so I'm failing by a larger margin. But once again, this is available to buy. Links below. Thanks very much. Please leave your comments below. And we really do enjoy your feedback. So you can join us on the Discord, and we're always receptive there. And of course, the forum is always available for the official sort of help and feedback. Thanks again.